Yeah, you can, but you have to do that within the virtual machine.
So is it safe to say that you should do most of your stuff that's important in the virtual machine?
Yeah, for the lab. All the lab work needs to be done in the Windows 10 VM machine.
But what if just on your own, so your banking, everything?
You can do that on a regular computer. Just make sure you have security software. Yeah. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started, right? I think I posted a few things. You have an extra credit if you have time to attend the event. Let me see. So I posted the extra credit for Inland Empire Cybersecurity Summit. That's happening tomorrow morning, from 10 to 12. This is just an extra credit opportunity. So if you do attend, they will have live demo with the FBI. That's kind of cool. And there will be some light lunch or food. So make sure that you check out the link and then you can register. It is in Fontana. Space is small. I think some of you or most of you have attended the last year one. It's always good to go to these things to network with people and learn industry tools and things. I'll try to come probably not exactly at 10, but maybe shortly after. And then I have to come back to the campus to teach the class in the evening. So if you do attend, a selfie picture will do, or if you take a picture at the event with someone or by yourself, you can just post that. Okay. When you check in, I think usually they give you a name badge or something cool like that. So check out the Inland Empire Security Summit. I think on the announcement this week, I posted a few things. You probably seen some of the scholarship one from last week. But if you are interested in transferring to Cal State San Bernardino, on Friday night, 6 to 8 p.m., they have an open house event for Cyber Expo. So they have a cybersecurity event along with an open house, and then they are showcasing some AI stuff. So if you are interested, you can register to attend. Usually it's pretty big. I've attended years back, but it's on Friday night, 6 to 8. So if you have time, check that out. It's always good to go and see and meet some of the faculty and even the student clubs that are there. And then if you're interested in their scholarship program, it's also good to go and ask questions or to learn about the scholarship that they have for the cybersecurity program. Okay. All right. So let's start with our Unit 9 notes and assignment. We're going to do Unit 9 assignments and notes, and then we're going to come back to Lab 8. We spent last week doing redo the Lab 7, so we're going to do a little bit of file carving and also looking at internet access and things for the user accounts today. So today we're going to talk about internet history, browsing history, and the forensic behind that. So browser is an application that you installed on the system. If you're using a smartphone, if you're accessing the internet, you have to use the browser. If you're using a desktop, like a PC, or even a laptop. So any system that requires internet needs some form of application, like a browser application, to access. Now, if you're using web applications, sometimes you are required to also have extension to the browser to be able to utilize the application. So when we do forensic for browser, we really take a look at how the user used the browser, what kind of websites they visit, what kind of customization they have for the browser, the activity, the logs, the history, the temporary files like the cookies that they saved on the computer, which tells us the type of activities and website that they visit as well. So now in the textbook and also the notes, you would see that it only mentioned the mainstream browser that you often see, and it normally referenced the file path in the Windows system. So in the first question of our assignment for assignment 9, it asks you what type of files can a forensic investigator examine to identify unethical or critical internet activity of a user. So if I'm looking at a user accessing the browser or the internet to be able to download files or search, as you probably seen some TV show about people searching for murder weapons, chemicals, or even bombs, right? Or sometimes there might be fraudulent activity like bank account money transfer, things like that. So with the forensic for the internet, what we can do is we can utilize the browser to examine its logs, right? So the files that we can obtain from the internet activity is going to be the browser logs. That means that the events, the activities that's committed by the user on that. So for example, if I add a bookmark page to my browser, right? Like I added that to my favorite page, that will also get added in the log. And then it also have history files. So now I know that a lot of the user are browsing securely. So they might delete the history files or have the browser delete the files upon closing, right? As we know that we can find other ways to be able to obtain these files. We talked about RAM and temporary files last time, right? So cache files and history files. Also your cookies. Cookies is really important. It plays a big role in sessions, secure sessions. Cookies stores a lot of the details about activities for that particular session. So let's say that I authenticated to a website and I go on that website, I started doing some, like maybe process some transaction with my bank account, or possibly, have some activity with that web application. Cookies, beyond just the session, it has a session ID, but it also includes information that would pertain to that particular authentication, and so on. So, as some of you probably have taken security classes and we talked about cookie poisoning, right? That's basically modifying the cookie and letting that cookie be use it as a redirection type of a point, or interrogating the cookies where we can look at the cookies and be able to obtain information from the cookies. So cookies are really important. It is just basically used for reference. I think nowadays a lot of technical companies use cookies as a point to gather data on your behavior and your activity online. So that's the same thing for forensic, right? We can also obtain password information, and then also favorites or bookmark pages. So that's really important in the case if you're investigating a user who committed a certain activity like fraudulent activity or so on. So the type of browser that we normally see are Chrome, right? Safari, Firefox, Edge. Those are the 4 common ones, and I think that's mostly we're going to address Chrome, Firefox, and Edge. Now, in the prior operating system, we talked about how Microsoft used to use Internet Explorer, and that went out a long time ago. Microsoft switched over to Edge, right? Firefox and Chrome recently have some updates. It's been a while since these browsers became available to the user, so now you abundantly see them used. And in the Apple environment, you would see Safari. So when you are looking at internet history and internet activities, we are going to first identify the type of browser that we have installed on that system, right? So when you are examining that system, you wanted to ask yourself what kind of web browser is being used. Any question? Okay, so the first part, it talks about Chrome. And for Chrome, right, if you're using Windows PC, that will be under the user account folder. Like, so if I sign on as Casey, it will be under Casey folder. And then the app data local, because this is application that's installed to the local system, and that's under the Chrome directory. Now, under Chrome, you would find that there's user data, and then if you want to look for bookmarks, it will be under the default folder. So all the favorite web pages, like when you click that little star to add it to bookmarks, or when you click add to bookmarks, right, it's gonna list all the websites inside this directory. And when you open it up, you can use a text editor like Notepad, or even inside the terminal, you can use Nano. So when you open up the file, it's gonna parse like this. Sometimes a little bit hard to see, so it's gonna give you the timestamp of when it was added, when it was last visited, what kind of website name that is. Usually that relates to the title of the website. So it's gonna give you some information like meta information, and then the URL. So you would see something, an example of that is like this, okay? So the timestamp you would see. So that means that we can see, we can pull it and we can parse it into a JSON file. When the bookmarks were added, when it was last visited, right? The website name, and then the actual URL, the domain. So in the computer, in the PC, where can you find browser bookmark file for Chrome? So you would go into the user folder under app data. You can grab that from the first page of our notes. Under the local folder for Google, that will be under the Google directory, and then Chrome, user data, default, and bookmarks. So in the bookmark files, you would find that you would have the timestamp for when it was added. So if I click bookmark this page, it's going to put in the time, the date and the time that I have added the page. And then a few days later, if I reopen that page, right, I go through my bookmark list and I click on that or favorites in some other browser, right? It's going to update that. So it's going to get appended into that file saying that this is the recent visited time. So the last visited, and then the system information. You got the name of the bookmark, which is and sometimes people customize that, right? Like I might add a page, but if the name is too long, I might modify that and shorten the name. So the name doesn't necessarily be exactly as the title of the website. It is customizable to the user, so you can add that. When I bookmark things, I like to keep it in subfolders, and subfolders are just a better way for me to organize my bookmarks. So it's gonna pull up all those directory inside that bookmark that directory under the applications. Okay. And then the full URL. Now, web history can be of importance depending on a lot of cases. What you see is you want to see what kind of activities that they have related to the case, right? Sometimes the bookmark files doesn't really give us anything if it has no information that's related to your case. But let's say that if you are investigating, like the last time we talked about how that fire case that was happening in with San Bernardino County, right? I'm sure beyond just like geolocations and other things, if they are able to, you know, I know they served a warrant for his house, and they were able to confiscate technology and things from his garage, his apartment, and so on. So as they pull those systems, they are going to go through and they're going to investigate. Number one, does he research the locations that are associated with the fire that occurred, right? And it's important because then we can start it identifying, you know, if he looked into a certain area to burn, when did he start looking into those area? Because maybe he would use Google Map, or he might be using the direct app or even the website itself. And then also looking at like equipments and things like that. So, you know, and if they can find that kind of information, then they would start pinpointing and then also relate it to other fire that occurred, because there were indications that he was guilty of, they suspecting that he might be guilty of other fire outside of the recent line fire that was occurring, right? So once you have found the bookmarks information, right? Sometimes it can be very difficult to parse this type of data or read or access this type of data. You can use some tools, proprietary tools would provide you with the resource to be able to parse JSON file. But you can use open source tool like Decode that allows you to access the file, and it would give you a text format of the content of the file. And that's what we want. So we want to be able to read some information that would be relevant to our case, like timestamp, right? When it was last visited. And then from there, you would then also look at history files. So for Chrome, let me move this up a little bit. Oops. For Chrome, for Chrome browsing history, where can I obtain this information? One, you want to, or what kind of information you can obtain. So you will be able to see what kind of downloads they have. So if you're investigating things like malware, right? We can look into browser history to see if the malware was downloaded and when. And then it provides you the path of the downloads and the save. So if I, as a user, download a file and save it to my downloads folder, which is the default, or I can navigate and save it to maybe my USB or another location on my computer, that path is then recorded in the downloads information. And then it also tells me the event for the download, the timestamp, when it starts downloading, because sometimes downloads can be unsuccessful, right? It might stop and then it might pause, or it starts and also complete. So if you have downloads, it's going to have a start and a stop time for your download. And the size information, like kilobytes, megabytes. So it's gonna give you the download file information, when it was downloaded, what kind of file it was downloaded, and where is it saved. And then if this is crucial in a lot of forensic type of case, right? Keyword search. So if they're using things like Chrome, like to search for a certain item or people even, right? So the search terms that was entered into the system, the application like Chrome, that's gonna go into the history file. And this is only when you put it into the URL bar at the top. Now, if you go through the search engine, let's say I go to google.com, that will be under the history of that particular website if it's not cleared, right? So when you look at the history, it will list the URL, and then under that URL, it would list the type of search words that were issued into that particular website. And then if I'm visiting different websites, so the URLs that I visited, the frequency that I visited on specific URL, and then the timestamp for my URL access. So for various cases, this would probably be some adequate information that we can put together from the artifacts, right? Now, if you're using FTK Forensic Toolkit, right, a lot of the times it will pull this for you. So when you look at bulk extractor today, it's going to try to pull that information for you. Now, is that going to be clean? Not necessarily. We have, as forensic investigator, we have to make sure that we take that information and interpret that information, right? Process and interpret. So it's going to present what it finds, and then how is, whether it's relevant or not is what you have to determine. So out of the system, it's going to try to pull that from the browsing application. Any question? So we're going to need to do this for our project. So when we come back, I want to say either the week before Thanksgiving or after Thanksgiving we'll start. So you should be able to have like a good 4 weeks for your project. It won't be too long, right? You have to capture the image and be able to process the image with a forensic application, and we'll talk about the requirements and all of that. Okay, so there's some example of the JSON that we saw. The decode, if you want to find out more information about that specific tool, you can go into the link. And that will be an example of it. And then when you do the keyword search, right, it would show something like this. Or the website that you visit. Okay, so there are some, and it shows here that they search via Thunderbird or for Thunderbird and then download. And we talked about how Thunderbird is used as an email application. So you see a download information there. And that's through Mozilla. Okay, so here are the cookies. You can find cookies information on page 4, but let's go to the next question on this. So what kind of information you can examine from looking at cookies file? You would be able to obtain user activities and sessions on visited websites, such as shopping carts, transactions, things that they are committed to the web applications. So if I open my browser and I visit Amazon.com, I log in, right? Then you have that session established. So there's session ID information. Cookies save things like, so when I close my browser, come back 2 hours later and reopen Amazon, my shopping cart is still there, right? Why? Because the cookie saved that information. So I don't have to start all over again. But a week from now, right, maybe the cookies have been modified or deleted. I might not have the information. And some web application, they actually they coded it to refresh, so it empty your shopping carts after a while. But or if I committed to a purchase, right, online, my order, so I can go back to that session by using the cookie. And it gives me the link that I visited. And also cookies will also give you web server information, the services that's used, and whether, and that's including with encryptions that would be required, because most of the things that we use with HTTPS, right, that has encryption, the data type, and your session's timestamp. Now the attacker, right, they can capture your cookies because then they can convert that into their own transaction, modify the shipping, so that way the products can go to their house instead of your house, right? That's a form of cookie poisoning. But cookies, for analysis in forensic, it tells you the user activities for that session. That's really important. Do you guys hear about the Meta case where employees are, so they, instead of having really big cafeteria like most tech company, right, Facebook is doing some changes for some of their campuses where, I shouldn't say Facebook anymore, they're Meta, right, where they give employee allowance to eat in the day, so they get a gift card, and that gift, or the, I should say, meal card, and that meal card we get replenished. But they have to use, the policies that they have to use the card for their meals at work, right? So what people have been doing, I guess one team has been sending meals elsewhere, meaning that I can order Grubhub and have it sent to my home so I can eat it later, or my girlfriend's or my boyfriend's house, or whoever, right? And they've been doing it for a while. So Meta started to do some accounting and they got a hold of it, and then they started questioning. So they started looking into some transactions, right? So that kind of investigation, you have to look into the activity of the user and then the transaction that they process, right? Going back to Grubhub or a third party applications and so on. So sometimes it can come back to something minute that could eventually cost the company a lot of money. So that becomes a fraudulent case. But they found out that like that whole group, that whole team was doing it in one of the division, and now they're all fired. But it's just so crazy over some meal cards, right? Okay.
You get fired for something like that, if they put your name on some list where you always have that.
Well,
Record?
okay, so when you go apply for another company, let's say that I leave that company and I go work for Google, and I get an interview and I get hired by Google, I do have the right to tell them that I don't want them to contact my previous supervisor, because on the application you have to put why you are no longer with the company. Sometimes people are honest, they would say dismissal, and for the reason you can be either clear or you can be, vague about it. By law, they usually want to do background on your work history and they want that reference, but you are not required to provide like the complete information. So you can say that, you've been dismissed, but you don't want to, for them to expand on that.
You can't
And
go
they,
out-
they don't have to contact, and you can say that you don't want them to contact the previous employer. So they have to find other ways. So they can contact a colleague that can vouch that you used to work there. Yeah. It doesn't have to be a supervisor. But, yeah, you've seen some people got fired for big things like hacking and other things that happen. Like, let's say I'm an IT manager and something happened and I got fired for it. I'm gonna have to tell my next employer what happened. my name might be all over the news already and they probably would know. So it's probably the best way is probably be clear because it's gonna come up sooner or later, you know?
Okay.
Yeah, but you're not required to disclose all of that. Any other questions? Okay, so for Chrome cookies, we can find that in user data in the default folder as well, just like how we seen. So it will be under the default, and then for the bookmarks, it will be /bookmarks, right? And so to read your cookies, there are some applications that's specifically made to read browser cookies, but you can always use a text editor. So when I say text editor, we mean Notepad, right? Nano in terminal if you're using Linux, not WordPad or Microsoft Word, right? That's a separate third-party application. It will not parse it as regular text. You might still be able to see some text, but because it's encoded differently, you won't be able to see the complete text. So open up in Notepad or your text editor. And then if you use Nearsoft, Nearsoft allows you to view your cookies. It's designed for cookie text parsing. So you can check out the information for Nearsoft in the notes. So here's the link, but you would see something like this. It's a lot cleaner. So it will put things in columns like the file path, the timestamp. So it's a lot easier than if you open it up in text editor, it might be a little harder to read. But if you don't want to use a third-party application, you can just use that. Okay. So some example you see on page 4. And then if you read the cache view, so this is the application specifically for cache, and it's gonna give you the URL, the timestamp, the server information, like what we talked about. Okay. So let me move 9 down. Okay, so the tool that you can use to view your Chrome cache information, your Chrome cache is going to give you a little bit more in details like server IP, transaction information between the server and the system, and then also the timestamp. You can also use Nearsoft. They provide the Chrome cache view, also the Chrome cookies view. Hello.
Well,
So that's one way that we can access the details of those files. But like again, I said that you can use text editor, right? Now, depending on the case, a lot of the cases that if it uses web applications, authentication is going to be required. So we will have to recover the password. In some cases, you would see investigator have to brute force PIN number or passwords, because if you're not able to recover it through files or locations, storage location, we will have to be able to brute force it to access it, right? Criminal investigation, you see some of this, like if they confiscate smartphones in certain type of criminal cases, you know, a lot of times when things get locked on iCloud, right, with Apple or locked through Samsung or locked with Google accounts, you will not be able to get that authorization unless you contact the service provider, right? So Apple has to be authorizing the access of that account as well because it's housed on their cloud. However, on that local system, you can also access it if you have the proper password. But in a web application, you will likely need a web-based password. So why do we need that? We need it to obtain data, okay? So for example, if I have a manager that you create a slush fund and transfer that slush fund to their own bank account, likely that they are gonna use a web application for that bank transaction. Even if it's an overseas bank, right? People can do it in seconds where, but bank processes, it takes at least 24 hours for the bank to process the batch transactions. So that way it would sync with other bank servers and the transfer is completed after at least a day or two, sometime 3 to 5 days. So with that, right, we would also see the timeline on, from the time that they completed the transaction until when the bank processed it. So that means that we have to decrypt the user data to see what kind of activity, the data that they have, right, for that session. And then if there are any other web activities, so you are gonna be required to use, to be able to access the web-based password. Now, in a lot of the devices, I think now we push a lot of multi-factor, right? Multi-factor is going to require you to have, an email, a smartphone, and so on. And then if the user is using a password application where it just plug in the password for you, right? That application also store data, which is the payload is going to be the passwords. So that will be a little bit more convenient for the investigators. So passwords, you can find that on page 5. And then for Chrome, that will be under the default folder as well. And Neursoft gives you the tool to look at Chrome Pass. Right? I know if you have Google account, you probably save that through either Google, or if you're using Microsoft, right? Or another type of password mechanism. And in the next section, it will be Edge. So Edge is Microsoft. And so here's the location for password. Same path basically that you see for the cookies. It's under the user data default. And you can use Neursoft Chrome Pass to read password information from the file. And that is, it stores there. However, as you know that we understand that a lot of the times things are encrypted, will require mechanism to be able to access it, but password files is going to give you password information. Now, as we saw in the prior lab, when you're looking at network traffic, right? When you log on to domains and web domains and so on, that gets added into the traffic. Your payload is there, right? If your password is not protected, you can pull it from your network traffic capture as well. So there are more than one ways, but the local system is going to give you information in one stop. So for Microsoft, when you're adding a bookmark page, that's considered adding a favorite. And this has been since Internet Explorer days. It will be under the user's account folder and then under the favorites. By default, Edge stores your web history for 20 days. Now, can this be configurable? Yeah, you can change it. People delete history upon closing their browser, but if I don't modify anything out of the box, right? I open my computer, I start using it, I don't change any kind of browsing activity requirements, it will be 20 days that it's going to retain the information. Why is this important? Well, if we are going back years or months, we have to consider that the browsing history might be added more, or it might be overwritten, or updated, right? Considerably, the default setting. 20 days, it's retained. So if, let's say that they suspect me of committing some kind of fraudulent activity, I delete my browser history from my computer at work, on my smartphones and so on, to clean my track, and then quit, just not show up to work the next day, right? As forensic investigator, where can you look, right? You can go into the delete files, right? We talked about that because on Windows system, it puts that into recycle bin and it doesn't go away. We can also look into RAM. You can file carve in the storage, like your hard drive, your SSD. All of this is on the OS, which is on the SSD or the hard disk drive, on RAM, and then on the micro SD or the internal storage of the smart device. So even if they clear it up, there might be remnants of information that we can obtain, right? And then if it's cloud-based, we can ask permission for the service provider to give us information. And then as your system get backed up, right? They might have not deleted it, 10 days ago. So you can look into the backup from that system 10 days ago, right? So there are ways that we can find historical information before the delete. And then for the cache file, these are temporary files that we save from internet activities. Microsoft puts it under local, Microsoft Windows, and then under web cache. But it's under the user account folder, under app data. And this is referencing Windows PC's file path, okay? So for 17, it says, how do you analyze Microsoft Edge cache files? So once you have access to it, you know where it is here, right? You can find it on the image. You need to import the image and use forensic tool to analyze the file by index. Unlike Chrome, right? The process for examining the file is a little different than what you've seen with Chrome. Chrome, we can take the file and use Nursoft or text editor to read the data. For the Edge, we need to import the image, right, that contains the cache files, and then we would use the forensic tool to analyze the file by index. Any questions?
You're all gonna be on the test.
Some, right? Some will be on the quiz and test. So web cache is under the history section of our notes for Edge. And then here it talks about, it shows you. So your Edge files, right? Because it's Windows application, it's going to be a .dat file like this. And then you would use ESE database view to look at Windows artifacts. And this is like something that you will have to install separately, or that will come with your toolkits. And it's going to show like this. Okay. So a little bit harder to read than what you see. So if you look at the the access date, right? You're like, what the heck are they referring to? These numbers don't represent months, year, or anything. So the below example shows you. So if it shows something like this, you need to chunk it up. You see the 2019 here, right? That's the year, and then the month and the date. It's just clump up together, no space. And then also, right, the year, the month, and the date. So it is a little bit harder to see because you don't have the, when you look at it from a text standpoint, it's just all together like as one value, but you would see that it's showing like the first time it accessed and then the next time that they access it. And then for the value, so you have to do decimal conversion, right? This is gonna, the decimal conversion, you need to make it into the hexadecimal. So you might have the decimal value like this. If you look at the screenshot from the previous section, look at that, right? That's a decimal value. In this column for the last time access. And if you don't use an application, you have to do numerical conversion. So that way you would have the proper date. But if you use something like decode, you plug that value in and it's going to spit out the date for you. Right? That's why you use decode. So you install this application, you would convert this. So how do I convert that? Open your calculator, right? And then go to programmer mode. Some of you already know this, like click here and then select programmer. And then take that value, click decimal, and then paste that value into here, right? Right click and then paste. And then you click hex, and it's gonna give you the hex equivalent of this value, okay? Then you take the hex value and then you put it into the decode, because decode only reads like so you select the option here. I think it has like the decimal too. Yeah, so you select the option. So here we're gonna do 64-bit hex, which is big endian, and you are going to get the date timestamp, okay? Because the system, it's gonna spit out a number like this, which does not make sense to any month or date or year, but it does actually contain it. So when we take this number, we convert it to hex, then take the hex value and put it into decode, and you have your timestamp. Okay, that's if you pull data for Edge browser. Okay, all right. Any question? No question? Okay, so we talked about the location, your cache file. We talked about how we can bring that in. Now, by default, Windows 10, if you don't customize the browser experience, 50 URLs is normally what it stores, right? At the max. So we can go back to some URLs. Now, if they repeatedly revisit the same URL, it'll just update the actual history file, right? It doesn't keep adding the URL. If it's the same URL from before, it just updates the history file. But the total, a maximum number is going to be 50 URLs that it stores in the history file cache. And then the cookies. So Microsoft has a different way to store the cookies for the web applications. It is still under App Data Local, but under Packages, Microsoft Edge. And this is also like for the version. And then when you drive down to the subdirectory, it will be under the cookies folder. So the elements that you really want to find, right, the artifacts that you want to find for internet access or activity, you want to really get into the browser. History, cookies, and cache files. That's going to be the, or even like search index or search for keywords, and so on. So if they have searched for something, that will also be stored on your temporary files for internet access. Now, Windows, where does it store Firefox browsers? So if they're using Firefox, it will be under local Mozilla and Firefox, but still under app data. So all else failed, right? You go to the user account, app data, and then you can drill down to the specific app, browsers or applications. So go and then go to local and then go down to the actual app. And so if I need to obtain information from the cookies for Firefox, right? We have Google cookies. When you're using Chrome cookies, you use Nersoft. When you're using Mozilla or Firefox cookie, you use MZ cookies view. That's going to allow you to parse, right, information or your data so that way it's easy to read. So we would use MZ cookies view. It should say, why is it difficult? I have an error here. And a little bit of the type URL, you can also get information on what kind of URL that they input into the URL bar, right? That we talked a little bit about how Edge stores 50, but it would show something like this, type URL, and if they type that into, so if I open Edge right now and type in like cali.org, right, it's gonna record it. Pinkbrobery.com. So you would see that under the type URL, under the reg editor, URL1, URL2, and so on. And then we talked about ESE database viewer, cookies for Edge, and then here's the Firefox information. A little bit different from what you've seen as the other ones for the application. So we are gonna drill down to some profile. So you see profile, like the example, they have bad guy and then bad guy needs love, right? You see that here? Bad guy needs love for the profile. So it builds out the activity under profiles information for this particular application for Firefox. And we talked about profile last time, right? Especially with the email and also the accounts. But I think that there are related information in profile that you want. And then for the Mozilla cache viewer, you can go to Nersoft, who also creates the Google Chrome ones. And then the history. And all of this because you can it is a database type of file, you can pull it into a database tool as well. Okay. So for question 22, it asks you, in digital forensic investigation, why is social media important, right? Why is it difficult to find social media artifacts? Well, social media tells you a lot of things going on. Yes.
They put up 19.
Yeah. Social media tells you a lot of information about that particular person. They might post facts or even going back to their post history information is important. But ultimately, all social media application includes user location, unless they modify that now because of privacy, right? You're able to turn off the location or edit the location. But social media contains geolocation. It contains information about that particular person. Social media information also gives you web activities or associated web activities. Now that you see social media, people can shop within it. They can search within it. Like I can totally use social media applications to be able to navigate my life without having additional resources or applications like browser. So it has the capability, right? I think almost all our social media apps is trying to be super apps. I don't know if you have used other social media application in other country. They are super apps. They've been super apps for a long time. So when I say super apps, meaning what, right? You saw that Facebook, Instagram, and all the other application had tried to integrate chat, shopping, all of these other things into one component. That's a super app. We gradually incorporated that in some of our social media applications. But if you go elsewhere in other country, if you use the application, it's been like that, right? People can chat within the social media app. They can buy things within social media app. You've seen that with TikTok, and others. So what you see is there are a lot more information that we can obtain when it becomes a super app like that. The communication, the text conversation that we can get, the locations. Now they say that a lot of these things are encrypted in communications, but if we can access the account with the proper decrypted password, you can obtain all of that conversation. And remember that company retain your text data for a long time. So, you can obtain that from the service provider. So the files are usually stored on their server. It does store some of it to the system local application. If you don't believe me, you can try it, right? You can go onto your smartphone, you can look at your messengers, and then you can look at the history and you could search through your text, like 2 years ago, what did you say to this person? And it actually stores some of that. But it syncs that with your server so we can obtain all of that information from their web server as well, or their social media servers. Technology is cool, but we give it a lot of data, right? Okay, so if you want to do more social media forensic, what kind of tools do you want to use? You want to use forensic toolkit like bulk extractor. It's able to look at social media profile, web profile, browser activities, chat applications, things like WhatsApp, outside of just what you see in the regular messenger based environment. I try not to get my smartphone apps to sync with all the other messenger because I feel like, I don't know, part of me don't want the other messenger to intertwine with my regular text message. But so I don't have that reaction like what you normally have on the phone where people like your message or you know um I just feel like it is a little bit more just invading into the other apps, and who knows, right, the security behind it. But Google and other apps are always trying to take over my messages. It's saying, hey, do you want to install it on top of it, make it a default app? Um, which I think now they force you to do that, right? Okay. Um, so where can you find the service information for some of these service provider, right? What kind of legal contact or authorization information? You should use search.org. And search.org, right, is going to give you information about some of your search provider or your service provider. And so you can use something like this. Sometimes you have to, it requires membership to give you more information, and so on. So this is a good resource for you to use. Now, if you can find companies' information by just like searching for them online. And then you can go to their particular contact page and it will tell you exactly, how you can contact their legal team, how you can contact their business or their public relation department and so on, right? Customer service, etc. So you would be able to have direct information from their actual website. You don't have to go through a third party, but in the case you can't, right, you can use search.org. So I would recommend going into the actual website of the provider and find the information under contact us. Or if you can't find the information and you attempted to contact them, you can go through a third party like search.org. Okay, so we talked about passwords, and then social media is on page 11. But you also have to keep in mind the social media applications that's outside of United States, right? You have user that might be using other application that might not be the popular ones that you see, um, but here are some of the popular ones. And then the next section, it talks about peer-to-peer, how, a system can share resource to another system. We do this with like airdrops and things like that. So we talked about NFC, Bluetooth, or even wireless, right? But when you are dealing with cloud, because we have almost all our applications, so web-based application that house your data on the cloud, which is at the server in a remote location, you need to obtain court authorization and permission to access the cloud systems to obtain the actual system image. In Europe, even if it's a criminal case, the user must consent for you to do so. So if they're using iPhone, that will be their iCloud, right? If it's United States, and if it's criminal related, we just need to have a court order. We contact Apple, Apple will be able to release that. But if this case is in the UK or a country in Europe, you must ask the user for consent. Okay. And that will be the end of our assignment. Make sure we save and submit. I cut the lab into half. We're not gonna do the Enron one because I think many of you probably, it's kind of older too, so it's even like before my time. So we are gonna do something a little bit more modern, so and it's gonna be adequate time, even though it's like 50, 60 steps. The longest part is you have to wait for the scan to produce something that you can start analyzing with. So that's the longest part, right? You have to be patient with these scans. So, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording for the lecture. Let's take a 10-minute break.